What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be talking about what is good for poker or bad for poker. And I want to start off by saying I feel like those expressions are way overused. It feels like every little thing has to either be good for poker or bad for poker. Like these micro events that happen have some kind of gigantic effect on poker in its entire scale, and that's just not correct. So what I want to do today is I want to break down a few different topics that people talk about as far as being good for poker or bad for poker. I want to talk about what their effects are, and I want to talk about what I actually do think ends up being good for the game. First up, let's talk about commentary in poker. Now, I actually like most, if not all, of the commentators that we have in the game. I think they do a great job and they make the game exciting. However, at the final table of the main event, a couple of them came under fire, most specifically Norman Chad and Antonio Esfandiari for some of their coverage. One of the most notable people that tweeted during the event about Antonio was Scott Seiver, who said, "Is Antonio and co actively trying to make poker look bad? Maury, get people in there that actually care about the game and have it show." And he's talking about Maury Esfandiari, who is the producer behind High Stakes Poker. I also believe Poker After Dark and is involved with Poker Central and helping them create their content. He's basically the go-to guy if you want to have a good high stakes poker show. Now, I don't know exactly what Scott meant with this tweet. I tweeted back asking what he did mean. He didn't respond, so I'm not entirely sure. But I think one of the things he might be referencing is Antonio talking about tanking in poker. Now, I did hear this at least on days 1 and 2. I wasn't listening for day 3, but Antonio at points did talk about young people tanking in poker and how bad it is for the game. Well, here's the thing. When we talk about things that are bad for poker and it's in the middle of a game while they're not going on, it might make poker look worse than it would otherwise. Like, for example, let's say you're watching a football game and you were complaining about how many penalties there were and how it's killing the game, but there weren't many penalties in that game. It wouldn't make much sense. It wouldn't really be something you'd bring up. You'd talk about how good of a game it is, how close it is or whatever. You wouldn't talk about something that's not happening. This might also be the case here with Antonio. Now, Antonio did also mention that he thought Dan Ott was not taking long enough. Vanessa Selps tweeted back at him, referencing this point too. So, maybe that's not exactly what Scott's talking about. Perhaps he's talking about how Antonio oftentimes will say that a player should make actions based on what the cards actually are. And he did tweet out afterwards, "Can Antonio make it any more obvious that his opinions on how someone plays their hand are solely dictated by being able to see what the opponent has?" So, Scott Seiver is certainly not happy with that coverage. And we had a couple other tweets too, most notably one from Olivier Bousquet, who said, "I'm sorry, but Norman Chad has basically been shitting on the poker community all summer, like WTF." Now let's talk about what commentary actually should be like. When it's national coverage and there are hundreds of thousands of people watching, you have to make sure that it is engaging and simple. Those are the two biggest things. And that can be tough sometimes because when you want to explain what's happening in a hand, you might want to talk about some upper level nuances, but you really do have to try and make sure that it makes sense to the casual poker fan. Now, I don't know exactly what Norm said or what Antonio said, but I can tell you about both of them. I think they are extremely good at relaying poker to the common person, which is really the point of their job. Now, if Norm said some things about poker players that were negative, I can't get behind that. We should certainly be embracing the game, not attacking it. But these guys do a great job. And I also think that, some of the other commentators, Lon McCarron, also in the booth with them, as well as Nick Schulman, I think we have a lot of great commentators in the game of poker, and they try and strike that balance. Now, Scott's problem that Antonio is, saying what they do based on the cards that they have, it's kind of a tough thing because to the casual player, that actually sort of makes more sense if they're saying what you should do based on what they have. Now, in the true spirit of the game, it obviously doesn't make much sense to see what the guy has and then say what you should do. Oh, he's got kings? Probably don't 3-bet here. You can't go too crazy with it. And Antonio did sometimes advocate for plays that they didn't make that would have been wrong. But in general, maybe he's gone a little bit too far with that. Honestly, frankly, I think people are just complaining too much. I mean, at the end of the day, the focus really should be on the sport itself. So was this commentary good for poker? Well, honestly, I don't think it matters much, but it couldn't have helped anything. So I'm going to give this a rating of 4 poker players tanking. Next up, let's talk about John Hess. Now, I think everyone is in agreement that John Hess is awesome for poker. Wearing his colorful jacket, being upbeat. Honestly, I was there at the event and he's walking by like, let's just all have fun. Let's have a good time. You know, super chipper. Even after he busted the tournament, he was still there as part of the event. He announced the shuffle up and deal for the final three. You can really tell that the guy had high spirits and absolutely is good for poker. But to what extent? Is John Hess really going to bring in a boom of older UK players that now are going to play that they saw John Hess? I don't really think so. I don't really think that it works like that. Also, you know, he didn't end up winning the event. So while we know John Hess today, we might remember him in 6 months to a year. Down the road, he's not actually going to be a notable story for poker unless he goes on to do other things, which is kind of unlikely. I mean, the guy doesn't even really play in many tournaments. So the question is John Hess good for poker? And the answer is, of course. Anytime you find someone that's upbeat and charming and nice and funny and makes YouTube videos and has a way with their fans and knows what to say and when to say it and is always looking out for the little guy, then yeah, it's important. And that's why I'm giving this video a rating of 2 Andrew Nemes. Let's talk about the Player of the Year race now, because this was a big issue for some people during the summer. Now, the Player of the Year race is something that I don't think affects poker much at all. People aren't going to debate getting into poker, oh, should I play or not, and then be like, I don't know who won Player of the Year this year. I'm not playing. I'm out. No home game for me. No home game for me. The guy won the Colossus. I'm done. The Player of the Year race is something that I think matters within the poker culture itself. The people that even know about Player of the Year are players that play and are familiar with it. So I don't really think the Player of the Year does almost anything to encourage a wider audience of players to play. Now, it might encourage players within the poker community to play more events that they might not have otherwise, and that's probably a good thing. But all in all, it doesn't really matter too much at all. Is the Player of the Year race good for poker? Well, honestly, a few people make a huge deal about it, but it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to rate this 6 GPLs. Let's talk about Phil Hellmuth here for a moment. Now, I honestly think that Phil Hellmuth is absolutely amazing for poker. He's 53 years old. He's been playing poker for decades. He's played infinite tournaments. He's won the most bracelets. But you know what really does it for me? It's the fact that he's played for so long and he still cares so much. Imagine playing poker for 3 decades and you still care about every hand. He goes on every show that he can. He plays on all the streams that he can. He's out there constantly because he loves the game and he loves the sport. Look, Phil Hellmuth is honestly just great for poker, and this is one of my favorite Phil Hellmuth moments. This was a post from Reddit Poker, and it's honestly phenomenal. It begins with Phil Hellmuth tweeting out at 5:02 on July 7th, "My eyes are fixed on the prize. Playing my heart out in the WSOP Raz. I have good chips, 23 left, 1 bracelet, hashtag positivity." And you can almost feel the good vibes as we enter 8:56 p.m. where the Poker News update. Phil Hellmuth check called on 6th Street before check calling on 7th Street as well. Owen showed 7-3 ace for an 8 low, and that set Hellmuth off. The is going on? He did this to me last tournament. Run so bad. What the play so bad. King 4-4. What the motherfucker? What are they? Goofy? And I don't exactly know what goofy means particularly in this instance. But look, the guy's heart's on the line. He's wearing it all on his sleeve. So is Phil Hellmuth good for poker? And the answer is absolutely. He loves to get people talking, which is why I'm going to give this a rating of 3 hot dog boats. Now let's talk about Daniel Negreanu. He's one of the biggest names in the game. Frankly, he might even be the most famous poker player, and he's an ambassador for the game today. Whether you like it or not, D-Negs is the face of poker, but sometimes I'm wondering what that face is exactly doing.
Why you do this camera in my face when me rolling up a spliff in mama right here, sir? Me play dominoes. See, dominoes, that's a game with skill and thing. You have to think about what you have to do with the 6 and the 1 and different kind of movement you can make, right? All right,
I know what it looks like, but don't worry, he's got a perfectly reasonable explanation. Before releasing the blog to the public, it was screened by a black audience. I knew only one of the people who screened it. No one had a problem with it. Oh, I get it. Okay. All right. I guess that's one take on it. So was this good for poker? No. Finally, let's talk about Qui Win, because when he won last year, people were going crazy. They said the game would never be the same. All kinds of new people would be jumping in. It's amazing for poker. You know, and frankly, I understand what the hype is about. We had about 5 or 6 years of kind of boring-ish poker pros winning the main, and now we have someone that's not really fit that mold. He's, you know, a bit of a different player. He had his raccoon hat on, but I don't exactly know what everyone was expecting in terms of what was going to change things. I mean, what's going to change it when this guy wins the main? Like, what, poker is going to look like this now? In reality, when someone wins the main and they're from a different background, it is good for poker, but on a very small scale. They might bring in a few people that wouldn't have known about poker otherwise, but in general, players aren't on the edge of their seats waiting to see who wins the main to decide if they're going to play or not. It's going to be more based on if they see poker and they see things happening that make them want to get involved. Now, you might argue that people enjoy seeing someone like Qui win, or maybe a John Hess win the main rather than some of these online regs, but I'm not entirely sure that that's true. I think that might be a little bit more manufactured by the poker community itself. At the end of the day, if you're a casual poker fan, you turn on the TV and you watch and you see someone win the main. You don't really care as much who the person is. You care more about the idea of entering that huge field, coming out on top, and getting a chance to actually walk away with all of those millions of dollars. So is Qui Win good for poker? Well, a little bit, but it got way blown out of proportion, so I'm going to give this a rating of 1 Poker Hall of Fame. There are many things that are good or bad for poker on small scales, but there are really only 2 things that matter when it comes to poker on a huge scale. The first thing is additional coverage and events in poker. As we have more high-stakes events, as we have more tournaments, as we have more TV time and more Twitch time, more YouTube time, more videos getting put out there, more people trying to bring new players into the game, that will always help poker. You know, Poker After Dark is coming back. That will help poker. And as we have more events and coverage, then people can see poker being played and understand what's going on and learn about it. It'll bring new players into the game. That's one of the reasons why I wasn't a huge fan that PokerGo was going to be behind a paywall. I liked the element of the streams in years past where anyone could watch them, and I felt it brought new people into the game. But again, that's small potatoes compared to national coverage like the main event, where you see hundreds of thousands of people watching the event. At the end of the day, that is way more important than what someone said about tanking. How many people are watching, and are we getting new people into the game? And number 2, positive legislation that allows more players to play in regions where it's not legal to do so. This includes America. If America brought poker back, that would be huge. And there are other developing markets too that are trying to get poker passed or make it bigger. You know, markets like China where you really can't play right now. If they got opened up, it would be massive for poker. Now, just because those are the 2 biggest things doesn't mean everything else doesn't matter. We should always try and do things that help the game. But worrying about poker on a micro scale because of one slightly negative story, or maybe even very negative story, that's not going to have a massive impact on how many people play poker. If you want people to play poker, more people have to see poker happening, and they have to be allowed to play themselves, and that's really what's good for poker. That's going to do it here from me. And wait, I'm receiving some news. Apparently GPL China has launched? This is amazing for poker.